As an engineer, do you have any speculation about why this 60-foot diameter disc resting on those thin tripod legs on the ground that compressed into the soil 2.5 inches, why would there have been any sound throbbing from below the ground in relationship to the disc?
The only thing I thought of over the years, Linda, was the fact that the energy, to make it do whatever it does, it pushes energy into the earth, and then that energy is from a frequency like on a guitar. When you pluck the string, you get that sound. That sound or whatever it was being pushed into the earth, and then it was being echoed back to the craft.
Perhaps there is a synergy that this extraterrestrial technology uses, that the disc itself is a power source, but that it is perhaps using matter and mass for its propulsion system in a way that we don't comprehend, and that rumbling from below the ground may have had some sort of a resonance that is involved with that propulsion that can go point to point from the ground to the zenith in a few seconds.
Yeah, I think you're dead on with that. All I could think about was this frequency and this rumbling sound, and thought that, well, maybe we're in danger. Maybe this thing's going to clean the entire area out in a second or something. But I specifically tried to focus on where it was coming from, and the noise was coming from the ground.
This has been an incredible story, Linda.
Yes. And I remember back in October 1975, Jim Moulton called me in Boston late at night, and he was at that time a helicopter pilot stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana. He was so excited, and he said, "Linda, a UFO has set down over a missile site on the base here." And he told me there had been a football field-sized, orange fluorescent, disc-shaped object encountered by the security alert team hovering silently over one of the Minuteman nuclear silos called Kilo 7. Now, jets were scrambled, and the large aerial object blinked out as the jets arrived over the missile silo. And then after that disappearance, the jets flew away, but the large orange fluorescent disc popped back into visibility exactly where it had been when the jets first approached. The security alert team reported to Central Security Control that the object was back and it was rising. It was reported that this large aerial object Dopplered off the radar screen at around 200,000 feet. Now, the most surprising discovery in that incident was that the magnetic tape targeting information inside that Minuteman nuclear missile had been changed. Specifically, the targeting information, which seemed impossible since the missile was underground and the large aerial disc hovered in the air. What technology could change only the target zeros and ones on the magnetic tape inside the missile underground? 12 years earlier, on March 16, 1967, also at Malmstrom Air Force Base, an Echo flight crew was 60 feet underground in the Flight Launch Control Center that was located 90 miles east of Great Falls. To everyone's astonishment, large reddish-orange glowing aerial discs were seen by a security alert team there. Simultaneously, 10 Minutemen intercontinental ballistic missiles started going offline one at a time every second. That meant 10 of America's most secure military weapons 60 feet underground had been controlled and shut down by a force from above ground. And then, incredibly, the same thing happened 8 days later on March 24th, 1967, to Oscar flight. 10 more ICBMs were shut down one at a time every second. These astonishing 1967 events were reported by U.S. Air Force First Lieutenant Robert Salas, who was in a missile bunker 60 feet underground when the UFOs showed up. Now, in 2013, after my September Coast radio broadcast, I received an email from Perry Manack of Seattle, Washington now, who is going on the record with his real name for the first time. It was fall 1971. Perry was assigned to Ellsworth Air Force Base near Rapid City, South Dakota, which had a squadron of 150 Minuteman II missiles. It was a B-52 bomber base, a KC-135 refueling tanker base, a flying command post base, and had an atomic weapons stockpile. In the early 1970s, Ellsworth Air Force Base was considered one of the prime nuclear military complexes in the whole world. He was assigned to supporting maintenance on all the equipment in the missile silos and Launch Command Center. Here now is Perry Manack.
Back in the 70s, you couldn't drive anywhere in South Dakota without seeing a sign that said, ice water at Wall Drug. Okay. You would drive down the highway and it'd say, you're only 10 miles from Wall Drug. You're only 9 miles from... So the closer you got to Wall, South Dakota, the closer you were to Wall Drug. Now, Wall is right above the Badlands National Monument. So the land out there is pretty harsh, very dry, alkaline-type soils, very difficult to raise crops or any animals on it. That's what's called the Badlands. Just to the east of Wall, on Interstate 90, is a desolate stretch of territory called Cactus Flats. There's nothing there, just wasteland. And this incident happened at Cactus Flats. The closest missile site to Cactus Flats and Wall Drug is the National Historic Monument missile site, and it's called Delta 9. Delta 9 is between where Wall Drug and that abduction happened, because it happened on Interstate 90 one night. And what I was told by the security guards was that the ranch house or the Delta Squadron security guards, and there's two of them in a pickup truck, were driving along Interstate 90, and they had seen a Winnebago that was broken down on the side of the road right there at Cactus Flats. They decided to help the people in the Winnebago, so they stopped behind the Winnebago, and one of the security guards got out and walked towards the Winnebago. As he got to the back of the Winnebago, the other security guard reported that he saw a blue light turn on from above onto the guy that was going towards the Winnebago. That's the last thing the security guard in the pickup truck remembers seeing, was this blue light shining down on the other security guard. And the other security guard that was going to the Winnebago, that's the last thing he remembers, was a blue light turn on from above. The next thing, the security guard woke up in a field north of Wall. The security guard who went to help the people in the Winnebago wakes up. He's out in the middle of a field. His shoes, his boots are missing, and his gun is, I believe, unloaded and laying off to the side. So when he finally gets his wits about him, he looks to the south, and he sees the lights of Wall Drug in the distance, which had to be a couple of miles away. And not knowing what happened to him and not remembering, he walks to Wall Drug, and he had to do it through his bare feet because his shoes were missing. Goes inside and says, can you call the Air Force here and tell them I'm here? We had heard about this, and we were always wondering, would we be next or something, because we were out at the missile sites probably more than anybody else. And so I was, at that time, taking a college course at the school in Rapid City to prepare myself to go to school after the Air Force on the GI Bill. While I was taking this night course, I noticed on a bulletin board in the school there that they were holding a UFO symposium by the astronomy department at the school. And I kind of thought that because of the timing that it had something to do with what I'd been hearing about. So I told one of my buddies, and we decided we'd go to the symposium, which was going to be held in the classroom there at the school. So we show up on that night, and I saw a guy at the symposium that I knew. We all referred to him as Colonel Klink. He was like a senior master sergeant. And we knew him because he was the first sergeant of our squadron. Now, my squadron was called the 44th MIMS, which is short for Missile Maintenance Squadron. So Colonel Klink was somebody we all knew because we all dealt with him. So we show up at the symposium in that classroom at the School of Mines. There were 2 astronomy professors there. I noticed that Colonel Klink was there. And at the start of the symposium, the professors talked about an incident happening out on the missile field there in South Dakota. And then he asked, is there anybody from the government there at the symposium? Because there was about 20, 30 people that showed up for this thing. And sure enough, 2 guys stand up, and they have dark suits on, skinny black ties, and white shirts.
Were they wearing sunglasses?
No, because we're inside at night. But they had buzz cuts, you know. They looked very FBI-like. So these 2 guys stood up, and they said, yes, they were from the government, and they were there to observe what was going on, and that's all that they would say. The symposium starts, and guess who starts to talk? It's Colonel Klink, my first shirt. But he wasn't my first shirt anymore. He had moved from the Missile Maintenance Squadron to be the first sergeant for the security squadron on base. So he had personal knowledge of everything that happened with that abduction. And he stood up at the symposium and gave the story that I gave you. Detailed for detail, the same story I've been hearing from the security guards. He was telling everybody at the symposium that, yes, this had happened, that this guard had got abducted and dropped off north of Wall Drug.
Has anybody ever filled in the details, even through circumstantial discussions with other people, about what happened between the time he was taken in the blue beam of light and then found himself north of Wall?
No, not to my knowledge. I have looked over the years over and over again on the Internet to see if there's some kind of report, and I have not been able to find anything. Now, there are other reports on Minuteman UFO activity on the Internet. They happen at different years, different locations, but nothing I can find can give me any details, any knowledge.
Didn't anyone at this symposium of the astronomers, the 2 FBI-like agents, ask, what did you learn from this man who was picked up in a beam of light and deposited 2 miles north of Wall?
Well, my understanding from listening to the security guards and listening to Colonel Klink was that he was totally unconscious the whole time. The last thing he remembers was he was walking up to the back of the Winnebago on I-90, and then he's waking up in this field a couple miles north of Wall, South Dakota.
What happened to the other security guard who had been with him?
He just basically kind of woke up, and he's sitting there in his truck, and his buddy's gone.
You mean that security guard was put unconscious as well?
Yes.
So they both say that they were unconscious during the missing time period of the second security guard who found himself north of Wall.
I don't know too much about the story about the guy in the pickup truck because everybody was concentrating on the poor guy that got picked up by the UFO. He remembers seeing a blue light and then waking up and there's nobody there.
I would have assumed that the security guard who was still at the truck would immediately have phoned somebody on the base and said, I just watched my colleague be surrounded by a beam of blue light.
He may have well done that. I would imagine he would.
Unless he was knocked unconscious by whatever the phenomena was right from the beginning, and both security guards had no conscious memory of anything beyond the blue beam of light.
Yeah, and that's my understanding is the guy in the truck, he remembers seeing the blue light, and that's the last thing he remembers, and then he wakes up, probably sitting behind his steering wheel, looking at a broken-down Winnebago and wondering where the other guy went.
Well, this is the first time in any detail that anybody that I know has talked about a security person or a military person on any base dealing with nuclear missiles being abducted by a blue beam of light that was seen and witnessed by somebody there with him.